What's going on, y'all? My name's Frank. Welcome back to the channel. So this is gonna be a little different video than what I usually post, right? So I'm just getting back from New Jersey. I've been out there since Tuesday. I had 7 shows to do as far as speaking to the kids. Just headed back to the shop right now. It's 3 o'clock. Me and Rachel, we've been separated. Divorce is down the pipe. Right? Wasn't what I wanted at first, but now I see it's very much so, unfortunately, very much so, needed. Whenever anything goes the way I don't want it to or goes wrong, I always try to take evaluation and see, okay, what could I have done differently, right? To get a different result. So I had a lot of time to think about that. And I took advantage of, I took assessment of so many different things, right? Roles that I played, roles that she played, roles that her family played. And then I started to sort of slim everything down, right? To say, okay, what could I have done differently? What could she have done differently? And then I started to look and be like, all right, well, the second that we're no longer together, she moves back home with her mother, right? So she's back home with her mom, back where she started. I started to realize that at that time, when I got with Rachel, I was looking for a broken woman, right? And this is probably going to make sense to a lot of people, and some people aren't going to see it. I was looking for a broken woman. Why? Because my mother was a broken woman, right? And I when I start explaining this, you'll see what I'm saying. Rachel, at the time I met her, she was living in her mom's house, sleeping on the couch. She had absolutely nothing to offer me but her love, right? And for me, that was absolutely fine. That's all I needed. That's all I wanted. But to the average person, they would have said, hold up. Don't you want somebody that has a little bit more to offer you? And like I said, at the time I did it. Because you know how they say we sort of marry our mom or marry our dad or look for our mom or look for our dad in our significant others? That's what I was doing, right? Rachel and my mother had a whole lot of similarities. They both dealt with addiction. They both had been physically, mentally abused by, men in their life. They just had a bunch of similarities, right? And so for me, I didn't see nothing wrong with that, probably the way that I should, because I said, well, that was my mom, right? I sort of seen my mom in Rachel. And I said, well, that was my mom, so it can't be wrong, right? And I thought to myself, I said, okay, if I love this woman the right way, if I'm faithful to her, if I take care of her children that, are her children that were before me, if I become a good father to them, if I love them, if I love her, if I provide safety and security, if I never put my hands on her, if I never cheat on her, all the things that other men had done to her, if I never do that, she's going to love me. Not only is she going to love me, she's never going to leave me, because I'm providing to her something that no other man ever has, including her father. That's what I thought, right? So I said, okay, as long as I love her, as long as I sort of help to fix her, and that's sort of what I did, right? I told Rachel very early on in our relationship, I said, yo, what do you want to do work-wise, career-wise? She said, I would love to become a nurse. I said, let's do it. Go ahead. You know, and that was a goal that she had, that we had, and she fulfilled it, right? And then when I came home from jail, I paid for her schooling, right? Something that she doesn't even really, if you were to ask her right now, she was sitting here right now, and I say, yo, who paid for your schooling? She would say, I did, right? And I did, meaning her. And then I would tell her, well, how about this, right? And show her how I paid for it. And then she would say, she would probably argue me down, right? And say, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. But then I'd have to physically show her the papers and say, well, I did. You know, it was coming direct deposit out of my account. So I did, even up till after we left, until I closed that account down, right? It was coming direct deposit out of that account. And I thought, I said, okay, she's broken. If I can help to fix her. And this was my thinking at the time. And this was very early on in our relationship. And then once it came to the point where where feelings became involved and I ended up loving her and falling in love with her, all that shit was irrelevant to me, right? Because I loved deep. None of that mattered. I didn't care if she was broken, if she was fixed. I just cared that I loved her, right? So then I thought, if I fix her, right, she'll love me. She'll never leave me, because I have had, you know, all the major female people that we have in our life, right? Like our mother, our grandmothers, our sisters to a certain point. I've had all of them sort of abandon me at one time or another, right? My mother, you know, she's gone. She's not alive. When she passed, we weren't talking, right? And that was my fault. I accept responsibility for that. That was me just feeling like she took my sister's side and something, and I just stopped talking to her, right? My grandmother, who was my second mother, who raised me. My grandmother, I never lied to this woman. Loved her just as much as I love my mother. She stopped talking to me after or before she passed, right? And I made attempts to, you know, to reconcile our relationship. Just didn't happen, you know. And at the time, that was hard to deal with, because I loved her so much. And I said, damn, why can't she just, you know, why can't she just like love me, right? Why can't she just accept me? And the whole reason we stopped talking was because she took care of my little sister's children, who I'll talk about next. You know, my sister's children, when my sister was in the middle of her addiction, and when she was like in the process of, you know, legally getting custody of them, and she was talking bad about my sister, right? And I said, oh, you know, I got offensive. And I got on the defense, and I took offense to that. And I said, oh, how are you going to talk bad about my sister when the majority of stuff you're saying applies to your husband, which was my grandfather, right? And she didn't like that. She didn't like that at all. My grandmother was a very, like, powerful, at the end, a wealthy woman, so she didn't like that stuff, right? So, I just said, damn, all right. I said what I said. It wasn't like this huge deal, though. Like, why can't you forgive me? Why can't you look past that? You're supposed to love. And I guess because I love unconditionally, I think everybody else does. And we know that's not true, right? We all know that's not true. And I just couldn't understand why she would allow words, right, to come in between that relationship. And there'd be times where, I'd see her out, I'd see her with the kids, and she never even acknowledged Major. And that hurt me bad, right? So those are two examples. And then my sister also. My sister was the closest of my siblings to me. And when so in the midst of her addiction, so there was the Kensington Strangler. It was a serial killer in Kensington. I just swore that he was going to end up killing my sister, right? That was such a big fear of mine at the time. And I swore, I was like, that's just the luck I have. That's what's going to happen. So I sort of mentally in my head, I prepared myself to get that call one day. And I remember the day he got arrested, and was happy that, okay, thank God that didn't happen, right? But then she ended up dying anyway, to an overdose. And we never got to make peace. Me and my sister were very, very, very close. Very close. She was probably the closest. Yeah, I would say she was the closest to me out of like all my family, if I'm being honest. And that's a third example, right? These were all women that were broken. I'm taking evaluation of this, and then I even seen as as I was beginning to heal from Rachel leaving, the women, obviously I had women reach out to me, pursue me, all that stuff, right? And there'd be these good women that have careers and have everything going for them. And I look right past them and be more attracted to a woman that I seen was broken, right? And I was like, what the hell am I doing? I was looking, I was like, man, there's something's not right here, And I started to look, and I was like, why am I doing that, right? And I started to realize I'm looking for a broken woman because I think if I make her whole, if I help to fix her, she's going to love me and never leave me, right? When the whole time, I could never fix Rachel. So I had started to realize or come to the realization that I can't fix Rachel. I never could, right? Because I wasn't the one that broke her. I could never fix her, right? I wasn't the one that broke her. The only person that could fix Rachel is Rachel. And that's just the way it is, right? And although she's made a lot of progress in her life, right? She hasn't made it in the areas that she was most broken, right? Dealing with conflict, learning to forgive, learning to move on, all that type of stuff. You know, or maybe she did. Maybe she did, and it just doesn't apply to me, maybe. I don't know. Like, maybe, you know, her next relationship will be, uh, like, absolutely perfect for her, right? I doubt it, though, because we all have those certain type of things that, you know, certain character defects or flaws or habits that we know, okay, you know, that's just a flaw that you have. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. But I was thinking about that, you know, and I was like, man, I was trying to fix somebody that was broken. Thinking that if I fix this woman that's broken, she's going to love me and never leave me, right? And I didn't think at all that I could like go and you know, do whatever I want. And, you know, that's not what I thought at all. You know, that like, oh, I could treat this woman like shit and she's always going to love me. I didn't think that. I just thought, okay, if I try to fix this woman, she'll love me. She'll never leave me, right? That's what I thought. And then I look now, and I'm like, oh, you're back at your mom's house. You don't have a vehicle. You're sleeping on a couch. You know, like you're a 40-year-old woman. You know, like what are you doing? Almost like aren't even really my concern, right? Should be like, well, this doesn't even really concern me. So, you know, the only way it would concern me is an aspect of my children, you know, because at the end of the day, we're separated. We live two completely different lives, separate lives. I could be fine without speaking to her for the rest of my life. And I'm sure, excuse me, sure she feels the same, right? And I don't wish anything bad for her whatsoever. I just, you know, even now when I hear her voice, I hear her talking, and that shit drives me nuts. Because I'll be like, yo, that's not who you are. Like, come on, man. Like, I'm so glad wrestling season is over. Because I would hear her talking to the other wrestling parents and talking like, you know, like she's this caring, loving mother and, you know, all this shit. And I'd be like, that's not who you are. Come on, man. Stop the facade. You know, stop it. Come on. You know, yeah. So I just thought I'd share that because I'm sure there's others that can relate. And if nothing more, maybe, like I said, maybe this is for me to share, just to, you know, get it off my chest, I guess. Anyway, have a great day, y'all. Remember to be kind, loving, and patient. Stay blessed.